Yeah, we are live. Do your little dancing ditty. Thank you all for joining us. This is part of the Less Than Secret, a Cryptid Anthology project that is running on Kickstarter right now. If you love cryptids, check it out. I will put a link to the Kickstarter campaign up on the screen. Check it out at tinyurl.com/less-than-secret. As a means to help promote this project on Kickstarter, there's not just the QR code in the upper part of the screen there. There's not just the link at the bottom of the screen or in the doobly-doo. I am also talking with the creators who have contributed to the project. And one of those creators is Ben, this gentleman right here. Say hi, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Thank you.
Too easy.
It's very easy. Oh, and Jessica has joined the chat. Hello, Jessica.
Good afternoon.
By the way, I read your comment on because I maintain a Ko-fi page to share my works in progress and early page updates and things like that. The newest script for The Legend of Jamie Roberts went up on there, and Jessica left the best comment. It made me laugh so hard last night when I first read it. It's like Jamie is drawn to trouble like a mosquito is drawn to CO2. And I'm like, yes. It makes me so happy. Hi, Angela. It's good to see you in the chat. Alrighty. So enough talking about my projects. Let's talk about Ben's projects, specifically about the short that he contributed to Less Than Secret, which is about which cryptid?
My story is called A Mother's Love, and it is about the chupacabra.
The chupacabra. Why'd you pick the chupacabra of all things?
Well, there are a few reasons. The big thing that made me choose it was the setting. I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons player, and I've been working on a custom setting for that game that is sort of a fantasy western. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I ended up doing with that is I actually had statted the chupacabra, sort of as the fantasy analog of the coyote in this setting.
Oh, okay.
And the story that I did in some ways is what I came up with as the quintessential. This is why you have the chupacabra in this type of setting. Mm-hmm. And when this anthology started up, and we decided that the theme would be cryptids, I'm like, well, I have a cryptid story ready to go. Let's do this.
Heck yeah. Real quick, thank you, John. Congrats on the Kickstarter, because if you didn't see, we reached our initial goal and we are reaching for our stretch goals now. So can you help us make our stretch goals? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
John's already helped, but yes, thank you. Yeah, John's a buddy of mine from college. He does great music over I think it's bandcamp.com/John Portable. If that's wrong, post the correct thing in the chat, John. I've done album art for him. He's cool.
Sweet. Glad to see you supporting us, John. So yeah, a D&D setting inspired the chupacabra story.
Yeah, why not? Like, part of what's fun about this anthology is everybody's done really, really different stuff. Mm-hmm. In fact, fun fact, we did have one contributor who unfortunately ended up having to bow out, but they were also going to be doing a Western story. So I wasn't going to be the only Western cryptid story in the campaign, but
yeah,
as it is, I am, and that's also perfectly fine because every single story is so different.
It is. Like, every story is a different genre. Yours is a Western. Mm-hmm. Rainer's is a horror. Mine's, like, I didn't realize it until after I threw it at everybody and was like, what genre is this? And everybody's like, magical realism. And I'm like, okay, we'll just say it's magical realism then. And then there's like slice of life, and there's comedy, there's horror comedy. Like, there's a little bit of everything, and a murder mystery. That, like, yes. There's a little bit of everything in this anthology. So if there's one story that didn't quite tickle your fancy, odds are pretty high that there's another one that will. Yeah.
But all the stories will probably tickle your fancy because they're really good stories.
Yeah. As far as I know, the only unifying thing that when we first started the project, because I'm one of the contributors too, but when we first started the project, basically you and Rainer were like, we don't want to limit people to a particular genre. So just make whatever story that you want about cryptids. Am I remembering that right?
Pretty much. Like, we had some very light restrictions. We had it had to be about a cryptid, like you had to pick a cryptid.
Yeah.
You were able to throw in others if you wanted. Arian McRae's story, Creepy Crawlers, actually has a bunch of cryptids, but it focuses on one.
Mm-hmm.
We gave you format restrictions. It was all going to be black and white, 12-page stories.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted it to be roughly PG-13 because just to not have the audience go too crazy. But
right,
yeah. Other than that, though, we pretty much, like, that sounds like a lot of restrictions when you say it, but it's not that much for an anthology.
No, there's been other anthology projects that I've wanted to submit pitches to that have been way more restrictive than this.
Yeah. I will say, like, one of the things that a lot of people don't get until you're actually creating on a regular basis is a lot of times those restrictions are good for creators.
Absolutely.
It's really helpful to the creative process to have rules that you can push against.
Yes.
Because it just, if you can do absolutely anything, it's really hard to pick.
There is such a thing as paralysis of choice. There's a name for this phenomenon, but if you're presented with
paralysis.
That's it, action paralysis. If you're presented with too many options and you don't have any limitations, you will get paralyzed because you don't know which option to pick because there's so many. So really, limitations, especially for like a creative process, are, I think, necessary to really make the best thing that you can.
And even if it's not another person putting those restrictions on you, when you're making your own projects, you come up with restrictions. Like, you set up a page size, you try to figure out what audience am I going for, how can I tailor this for that audience. When I did started designing Cospain, my webcomic, I have to do every single one of these stories in these 4-page strips. Although, spoiler alert, that might actually be changing soon. I'm thinking about doing some larger stuff just to mix it up, because
what?
It's a comic about convention.
Formula? What?
Yeah, mess with my own formula. I can do that. I'm allowed, but it will be very deliberate when it actually happens. But yeah, the other thing is when you're working on someone else's project, which in some ways working on an anthology is, there's a little bit of freedom where you can say, well, this is not necessarily, like, I'm going to own this, but it's not necessarily what I normally do. Like, there's a freedom to that where it can be like, I am not even constrained by my own normal requirements. I can do whatever I want to do within this other person's rules. And in the end, it's sort of, this is a very dicey thing I'm saying. Because we're not going to own the stories on the anthology. Like, okay, I'm one of the people running the anthology. The people running the anthology do not own the individual creator stories.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. But there is a degree to which it feels like you're making work for somebody else's project.
Yeah.
And that gives you a certain openness.
A certain openness and a certain level of accountability, as it were. Like, yeah, you're presented with a topic, but you're given some free reign as to what you want to do with that topic. John actually brought up a good comment. I was assigned to write a song called Chupacabra recently and learned a fun fact. Do you guys know how old the myth of the Chupacabra is? I do not. Ben?
I actually did research a lot of this. I'm trying to remember. It's not old at all. I want to say the last 50 years. Maybe longer than that. Because to me, like, the 50s were 50 years ago.
Yeah, but this point, that's like 70 years ago.
It's definitely the last century. It originated in Puerto Rico, I believe. It's been a while since I read the wiki, so I could be off on this. There were a bunch of goats that were found dead, drained of blood, with like 3-pronged punctures in their neck. And that's sort of become the typical thing for the chupacabra. It periodically gets spotted. Some people say it looks like a dog. Some people say it looks like a large lizard. Some people say it looks like a large lizard dog. And there's one apparently famous report where the description they realized that this old lady had given was exactly the same as the alien from the movie Species. Like, they realized
just that one report.
I don't know why this report got big, but it made it to the wiki page.
Done now.
John, did I get that right?
Let us know in the comments, John. We'll highlight it. So actually, shooting off of that, what was the most interesting thing about the chupacabra that you learned in your research?
That it's that recent was the big one to me. Because in my head, it was a folklore creature, which I guess cryptids in many ways are, but I guess I thought of it more as, oh yeah, there have been sightings of it for the last couple 100 years or something like that.
I know, like there's definitely that like air of mystery about the cryptids that make you wonder, wait a second, I'm only just noticing this now. Has this been here the whole time? And fun fact about the Mothman, actually, because I did a short story about Mothman. The earliest sighting of him is the 80s.
That's a lot sooner than I would have thought.
Yeah. He was spotted in a very narrow window of time, but the last sighting of the Mothman was right before the famous bridge collapse. I don't remember the name of the bridge off the top of my head, but he was spotted flying under the bridge repeatedly before the bridge collapsed into the Ohio River, and a whole bunch of people died. Which is why the Mothman is as notorious as he is as far as cryptids go, because from what I can tell, he's about the only cryptid that has death associated with him. From what I can tell, aside from a terrible B movie that I have in my possession, which is so good, it's so bad it's good.
Documentary?
No, hold on. I gotta show this thing. It is absolutely stunning. I got this at a convention, and it is actually autographed by the director. It's called Camp Out with a K.
Always a good sign.
Yes, always a good sign. It takes place in like Southeast Ohio, right near Athens. So I picked this up at Rathacon. But this was filmed in the Athens area. It takes place in the Athens area. It is about Bigfoot.
I would 100% watch that with you when things open up again.
Oh my God.
I love me some bad movies.
It is so bad it's good. I love it because like there's one section where they like find this big old wad of hair and they're like, what is this? This doesn't look like any animal that I know, even though it's definitely ripped off of a wig. And they take it back to the lab, and the lab is definitely a break room with a high school microscope on one end of the sink. And they're like, we need to analyze these, and they just it's so good. It's so good. And also there's teenage actors.
Actual teenage actors?
There's actual teenagers.
Nice. I'm not going to mock any like teenagers involved in that project though, because
I'm not going to either. I'm not going to fault them for that. Yeah,
like,
everyone has to start somewhere. But I know that the people who made this film had a lot of fun with it, and they knew what they were getting into, because you could just tell by the vibe that they give off anytime that they're on camera. But
one of the things I've observed is that the horror community is one of the most positive communities I've ever come across.
Oh, for sure.
Like, I don't know what it is, but everybody seems nice in that community. I've seen so many things talking about horror celebrities like Robert Englund and people who met Romero and stuff like that, and they're all like, man, they were so nice. Like, I've met so many mean celebrities, but the horror people are cool.
Yeah. From what I understand, there's really like two circles of people that if you ever want to meet somebody who's like actually genuinely nice or down to earth, who are in acting in some way, you either got to talk with somebody in horror or a voice actor. Everybody else is like, don't bother. That's my understanding.
One thing that I will also bring up, just because you mentioned, we talk about actors getting their start, and some of them starting very young. I'm doing a Let's Play right now on Twitch of Until Dawn.
How's that going? I haven't been able to tune in yet.
It's going great. The whole thing is basically a slasher movie.
It is. Yeah.
So are you familiar with it?
I'm familiar I'm familiar with the pitch.
Yeah.
I know that it's by the same, like, it's led by the same guy who did Heavy Rain. And
are you sure?
Pretty sure, because it's quick timey events.
It is QTEs, but this is actually well written.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds mean, because I actually really enjoyed Heavy Rain. But Heavy Rain is one of those games where you can tell the guy making it doesn't actually understand how life works.
Yeah.
Like he kind of figured out how he thinks he knows how cop stuff works from watching a lot of cop shows in a foreign language. That's the best way I can describe it.
That's great.
It's honestly, like, first off, if you haven't played Heavy Rain, at the very least do a Let's Play, because it's or watch a Let's Play. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It's a good mystery, but yeah, there's some weirdness in it. Like, one of the things is there's all this sci-fi CSI style tech where like one of the main characters has these glasses that let him analyze everything, and he's got a special glove that does stuff. And while we were playing it, I was like, the date came out and it's contemporary. This guy thinks this tech exists now.
Oh my gosh.
It's really funny because I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh, you've been watching too much CSI.
Yep. Yeah.
But getting back to Until Dawn, it's actually an incredibly well-written slasher movie. And it's got a bunch of actors playing who are 20-somethings playing teens, which I appreciate, because that's how it would be in the slasher movie. Like, they CGI'd all these guys. They could have made them actually look like teenagers. They didn't.
No.
Because they wanted to look like these movies. But what blew my mind is that one of the main actors in it is Rami Malek.
I know that name. Tell me where I know that name.
He won an Oscar a couple years ago for Bohemian Rhapsody. He played Freddie Mercury.
Thank you. That's where I heard the name from.
But like, this is one of his early things, and I was just like, "What? Rami Malek's in this?
Surprise!
Playing a teenager? A really awful. Like, the great thing about a lot of this experience also is I actually generally don't like slasher movies. I'm into a lot of horror, but like, one of the big things is, especially teen slashers, I usually am in the camp of, it doesn't matter how awful of people they're being, they're teenagers. They don't deserve to die.
I mean, you're not wrong.
So I kind of always like have that level of sympathy for the characters, even if they're being terrible.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen in slasher movies with older characters, because I'm like, that's who they are. That's fine. They've settled. Yeah.
I will say, speaking of like getting into horror and slashers and things like that, I've recently discovered a podcast called Hi, That's Scary. And that's Hi as in HIGH, because the premise of the show is that the host smokes weed and then watches a horror movie. And then she does this like play-by-play of like the scenarios of the film and how she reacted to them and how her roommates reacted to them and all that stuff. And she did one talking about I think it's Halloween that has Jason in it, right?
Friday the 13th is Jason.
Friday the 13th. Okay. Yeah. But like the Jason, the mask and the knife and all that stuff. The one where Jamie Lee Curtis is
that's Halloween. That's Michael Myers.
Okay, that's it. Okay. I don't know my horror stuff. I'm sorry. Fine. It's not my genre. I'm still slowly getting into it. But she was talking about, the host of Hi, That's Scary did an episode talking about Michael Myers and some of his stuff. And she brought up some of the things that the other teenagers did in that movie. And I'm like, oh, no, these people deserve to die. Like, I don't care that they're teenagers. When you start talking about like borderline pedophilia things, like, no, I have no sympathy for you. If you get off by Michael Myers, like, they got off for the wrong reasons by Michael Myers, but still, like, I'm not going to feel that bad for them.
In one of the things in Until Dawn that's interesting, because it's a very choice-heavy game. Everything you do has consequences.
Yes.
And you get to play as pretty much all the characters at various points. Which part of what makes it interesting is there's always the problem in watching horror movies where you're just like, you died because you were dumb. Like, why did you do that? Why did you make that choice? Like, everyone's screaming at the screen, don't go in there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And now you're the characters making those choices. And there are choices that might save you, but you don't know which ones they are. Like, sometimes the obvious choice, or what seems like the obvious choice down the road, is going to end up getting you killed. And I'm actually surprisingly close to finishing the game. It's pretty short, but I kind of want to do a replay pretty soon and just do completely different choices and see what happens.
I mean, that's part of the joy of replay values with games like that, where your endings are multiple choice. You want to see all of the endings that you can. It's part of the appeal for a lot of indie game developers that I have seen will make RPG games with RPG Maker. And part of the replay value with those is seeing what endings that you can unlock. And some of them will come up with like 26 different endings, depending on what collectibles you grab. Stuff like that.
I have a horror game I've wanted to make for a long time in RPG Maker. And I'm just, there's so much time that goes into something like that.
Oh, so much. Yeah.
Like, a couple problems. One is, I like RPG Maker is pretty easy to figure out, but there's still a lot of storytelling and timing stuff that's really hard to learn. There's a steep curve for that.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, I do not know how to script that kind of thing yet. Like, I've kind of been making it up to figure it out, but there aren't a lot of tutorials for how to write the script for games where there are multiple choices.
For folks who may be watching this live stream who are really into writing for video games, maybe like promote yourself in the chat and let us know.
Yeah, hit me up. Like, I'm at BWH Comics and everything. I'd love to know how this works. The best way I've been figuring it out, there's a short horror story I did a while back, a comic called The Light Outside the Window. And I've been working on adapting that into a short RPG Maker horror game. And I've got the script like half written. Because one of the things that's fun, because of the comic, I know one of the paths all the way to the end, and now I just need to figure out the branches. But it's been interesting trying to figure it out. I also want to make my own assets for everything, which is probably dumb. But
I mean, I don't know much about making RPG Maker games, so I don't know about that. But that's
I mean, it's pixel art, but I mean, think about any RPG you've ever seen. There are a lot of different types of tiles and things like that. I don't need to change all of them, but in my head, I want to.
There's tiles, there's poses, there's different items like props and all that stuff. Like, as somebody who currently is the chief creative officer at Neverending, who is in charge of like coming up with all the things for a character builder, just like imagine all of the options that you could possibly make for a character builder and then put that into a video game and multiply that by how many like characters that you have in a game and then add backgrounds on top of that. That's basically designing a video game.
Pretty much. It's crazy because I don't know. I also can't use any of the stock assets that are there because most of them are going to need to be in black and white for this, because that's how I want to do the art style for it. There's only going to be color in specific places, which means it's technically going to be in color, but I'm going to be using grayscale assets. It's going to be a nightmare. But it's on my list.
I will say, this is something that I've noticed about your comics. We're going to circle this back around to comics for a hot minute.
Okay, cool.
Because when you talked about making a game in black and white with color sporadically in there, that's a theme that I noticed in your comics too. You work in black and white, but there will be specific things that you will want highlighted that are in color. I know you did that in Letters of the Devil, which I will read one day, I swear. But I know that you do that with Letters of the Devil and its sequel. I saw you do this with Trinary, the one like small mini comic that you did that I got from you. And I've seen you do this with a few other stories. So what prompts that artistic choice to work in black and white, but only have like one color?
I just really like how it looks. I don't know if I can give a better answer than that, because I've done it a lot. I did it for my two graphic novels, The Letters of the Devil and its sequel, The Legacy of El. I started, I think, was Trinary the first time I did that? It might have been. That was my first year final project at the Center for Cartoon Studies.
Gotcha.
Actually, it's the only time I've pulled it's the last time I pulled an actual all-nighter. Like,
wow.
even I've done 24-hour comics, I've managed to get some sleep in, but I pulled an all-nighter because I was hand binding the spine with wire, which I do. Looked awesome. Don't recommend it. It takes a long time.
Yeah, no, like that's one thing I do love about mini comics. You can bind them however you want to, but like, oh my sweet heavenly salty tomatoes, like be mindful of what materials you use to bind stuff.
It was so cool. It's just a lot of work. I did it for one of my 24-hour comics, and there was because of coloring it would have been a nightmare because it's a 24-hour comic. You got to be fast.
Yeah.
But I really like it for horror, especially. The light outside the window is the same thing. The ghost you interact with turns everything, is someone who died in a fire. So there's like this orange fire color that comes into it.
Yeah.
Actually, fun fact, I use the exact same amber color that I use for Trinary. The Man in Green was one of my more recent horror comics, and that has a ghost in the back that is green, and that's one of the only times that the color pops up is whenever he's around. And I kind of like that it's something outside of the normal world, which is black and white.
Yeah. That's a really cool aesthetic. Like it almost gives this as much as I knock on H.P. Lovecraft stories, it gives this kind of colors unlike any scene on Earth vibe to it.
The color out of space is one of the coolest concepts he came up with. I really like that one.
I do love the concept of the color out of space. There's a lot about his short stories that I'm just like, not even getting into the more problematic stuff, but like some of his descriptions are yeah.
I actually think his descriptions are best when he's not describing stuff.
On the one hand, I agree with you. On the other hand, it's like, could you at least make an attempt, buddy?
He was okay. I want to be clear. Lovecraft had a lot of problems.
Yes.
Besides the obvious, he also, like, as a writer, had problems as for composition. But one thing he did very well is he understood how to say just enough that your imagination fills in the gaps. In fact, his early stuff is better at that. Like, the more he wrote, the more he got into the same, I'm going to over-describe everything.
Yeah, I can see that.
I also think his fantasy is more interesting than a lot of his horror. Like, The Dreams of Unknown Kadath is fascinating if you ever get a chance to check that out.
Which one?
The Dreams of, what is it? The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, I think it's called.
Okay.
The whole idea, like, it's very weird, and the not describing things might drive you a little crazy, but the entire idea is it's one of his main few recurring characters, Randolph Carter, who lives in the world of dreams now.
Ooh.
And there's this city that he remembers that is the perfect city, and he wants to return to it. And it's his journey through the world of dreams to try and find it again. And the thing that's fun about it is there's this whole, like, lack of logic to the place, because there's so many spots where where Lovecraft will just not really explain anything but say stuff. And the whole idea is it's a dream, just accept it like it's a dream.
Yeah.
Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. Thank you, Rainer. I see that in the chat.
Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. Let's catch up on the chat, actually, because there's been some activity in the chat. Circling back to Until Dawn, best part of the game is seeing other people playing it too. Yeah,
I said in a recent post, it's like the best, horror games are way better when it feels like someone's watching you.
Yeah.
I've been mostly in doing the stream with my friend Destiny, who's one of my D&D friends.
Yeah.
And it's been great having her in the chat because she hates when I do puns. And I do puns all the time.
Yes. You need somebody to groan at your puns.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's not fun.
If I don't have the chat say periodically, Ben, leave, then something's wrong.
Exactly. Andrew commented, I remember making my own StarCraft campaigns. Man, I had so much fun, so much time back then. Yeah. I feel that, but like, yeah, I feel like it might be a little easier designing a game for tabletop RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, than it would be designing like a video game necessarily. At least it's a little less tech heavy with TTRPGs.
Yeah, in TTRPGs, the best thing is you can break any of the rules instantly. If you break the rule in a video game, the video game stops working.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like you do have to be very careful with that. StarCraft, I never actually got into, although I kind of wish I had because it's supposed to be an awesome series. But I actually did a little bit of game modding in the Command and Conquer games because I had a friend who was really into that. And Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun, one of the things that's interesting is they had just a text file that had all the character assets. So you could actually go in there and create brand new characters by copy pasting that and making alterations. And they'd show up in the game. So I remember there was, I'd played Command and Conquer Red Alert and then Tiberian Sun, and Red Alert has Tesla soldiers, which I thought were the coolest thing ever because they shoot like laser beams or like lightning beams at people.
I mean, just the name, Tesla soldiers.
It was awesome. And they're not in Tiberian Sun. So I'm like, I'm going to find a way to make this. So I figured out how to make a soldier that fired a yellow laser beam. And like, that's about as far as I ever got in game modding. But it was cool.
Heck yeah. Going back to comics, I'll just go ahead and ask you this thing that I've been wanting to ask for a while. Before we get too much into genres or anything like that. Why the heck did you get into comics in the first place?
The eternal question.
Yeah, well, for one thing, anybody who works in comics knows what working in comics is like. Like, did you know about that and you just went in anyway, or was it something else?
It was a little, well, for a long time, I thought I couldn't do comics. I'm one of those kids who grew up reading newspaper comics in particular a lot, getting into all this stuff and drawing my whole life. And I always thought you have to have a certain level of, like, you have to be this good to be able to do comics. And so it was always kind of like a pipe dream. It was like, that'd be something I'd really love to do, but I'm never going to be able to do it. But I did want to do storytelling and things like that. I wanted to get into that. So when college rolled around, I was a film major, basically. Like, our college didn't actually have a film program, but I was an English and drama double major focusing on film. And I actually did a webcomic during that time, very, very briefly, with somebody else writing it. And unfortunately, like, it did not end up working out because I was doing a lot of stuff the hard way. And I just didn't know better. Like, I was doing it traditional on like these giant sheets of paper because that's sort of how I'd learned to do it. And it was taking up way too much work, and I was in college at the same time. But after college, I was thinking I was going to start doing screenwriting as my main thing. Like, that's the industry I was going to get into because theoretically, that's more lucrative. Maybe, not really. Any creative job is not particularly lucrative.
No, not really. But you got to hustle your butt off to make it work, no matter what you pick.
I did, but yeah, I was planning to do screenwriting. I'd also done some film editing stuff. Like, I'm gonna, go out, eventually go out to Hollywood and make all this happen.
Yeah,
and try to do that. And I graduated in 2008, which was a terrible time to graduate and want to get into film because not only
I was about to take a sip of my tea when you said you graduated in 2008, and I was like, I know where this is leading.
Yep. So in 2008. First off, the stock market crashed and started the recession. And second off, the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild went on strike that year. So nobody was working on that kind of thing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back home after college and work on writing some scripts, get this stuff ready. And I kind of had, that's the first time I really started working for a living because I got a customer service job. I had grown up in a very academic environment. I kind of had this light bulb moment around August that year when I had friends that were going back to school, and I realized I'm never going back to school again. That's done. Like, I don't know what the world is other than that. I didn't really know what working for a living was. And so that kind of got the ball rolling on a lot of stuff. I went to I ended up working customer service just to have a day job while I was there. And one of the things that happens when you're on the phones is you're sitting at your desk. There's not always extra stuff to do, and I started doodling. I actually had a revelation moment where I started drawing and I realized I hadn't drawn anything in a year. Like, just in figuring out all this stuff and getting everything going and working at a job, I kind of had that click with me. And I started doodling all these, I just started drawing a lot. And one of the things I came to realize is, it doesn't matter how good you are at comics. I want to do comics. Like, this is honestly where I really wanted to do stuff, and I can just keep doing this job and do that.
Yeah.
And then I learned about graduate programs in comics. I'm like, wait, I can do that?
Yeah.
Okay, then.
So when you did your research about graduate schools that did comic stuff, I know you went to the Center for Cartoon Studies. What made you choose that over, say, the Savannah College of Art and Design, which I know they have a grad program in that as well?
They do, and I actually got into it also. Like, I applied to both.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and we talked about action paralysis before. I'm terrible when I have two decisions that I have to make that are equivalent. Like that, there are differences between the two schools, but there wasn't a wrong choice, and those are the hardest choices for me to make.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the things that was interesting about it, I did a lot of pro and con work trying to figure it out. When I first heard about the Center for Cartoon Studies, I'll be completely honest, I was a little worried that it was a scam, because it just didn't seem too good to be true. And it's like such a small program in the middle of nowhere, things like that.
Yeah.
What turned me around on it is I got to see, so VCU, the college in one of the colleges in Richmond, actually invited James Sturm, who founded the Center for Cartoon Studies, to do a talk. And a little later, they invited Steve Bissett, who is one of their instructors and you've heard me talk about endlessly.
Yes.
But one of the things that's interesting is, like, James came in to talk, and his talk was interesting. I went to see it. Steve came in and he was a rock star. Like, it was really interesting because he knows how to work a crowd. I went actually with my mom, who does not get the comic thing at all, but she's very supportive and stuff like that. Yeah. And sitting in on Steve's, he actually walked us all through a horror comic that he did. And in addition to not being into comics, my mom's not into horror at all. She hates horror. And this is like a 4-page comic he did, and he walked us through the entire thing. And at the end, my mom was like, "That's the first time I ever got a comic." Like, and it was just, he was that impressive. And when it came down to it, I was doing the pros and cons for CCS and SCAD. Yeah. And honestly, Steve was one of the big things where I went, I'm really impressed by the CCS faculty. I think that's the direction I want to go in.
Yeah.
Not knocking SCAD faculty at all. It just, that particular moment really hit me pretty hard.
Yeah. It just, you saw that and something just clicked.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny because I got to meet Steve that night because I went up to him and bought a copy of Swamp Thing because that's what you do. But I told him I'd gotten into both programs. What do you what can you tell me about it? And the thing he said is actually pretty accurate from everything I know about SCAD. He said, if you want to do work for hire comic pages for big publishers for a living, SCAD is probably the one to go with. If you want to be making your own stuff and independently publishing, CCS is the one to go with. And yeah, that's honestly pretty true. I'd really like it if CCS did a little bit more on how to work for other people.
For hire stuff.
But yeah. I did, one of the great things about CCS is you learn how to do the entire process from the ground up.
Nice.
I've heard a lot of people talk. I've heard some people talk about SCAD where one of the tricky things is you'll have a great portfolio of individual pages when you leave. Like, your work will look great. You'll be able to do work for hire. Fantastic. You're not going to have a lot of completed stories in your portfolio because they don't really teach you to do that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think this is just my personal bias, but yes. I think it's more important to be able to know how to tell a story in comics form from start to finish than to be able to make just one really good page.
Yeah.
But that is my bias.
I do agree. I think that the strength with SCAD is, I think it's a lot easier. I've had a hard time figuring out the freelance game. I do not consider that. I've
been doing it
barely
for
made that
years,
work.
so like I have some hot tips for you. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of weird because there are so many people like within my circle that just come up to me and they're like, "How do I do this thing in freelancing?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, you did that,
Yeah.
but like, it's so weird to be in that place because like for the first like a year or two that I was doing it, I was just winging it. Like I was doing my best. But it's, in a way, freelancing is a little bit more like undergrad at school, where it's like they'll give you a fuzzy deadline, but you have to set your own deadlines. And
Yeah.
they'll give you rough guidelines of how to make the thing, but it is up to you how to make the thing. So when you start treating it a little bit more like, okay, this person just handed me an assignment and I need to finish this assignment. And then I need to finish it on time. And when you do actually send it in like on time, folks will start to recognize that and they're like, "Oh, hey, a person who meets their deadlines." And they'll start recommending you to people. Yeah. Like, there's this ism in freelancing, especially in freelancing in comics, where it's like, you got to be good to work with, you got to make good stuff, and you got to meet deadlines, but you only need 2 out of 3 to be successful. Yeah. But to me, the more important thing is to make your deadlines, like above all else.
Yeah, that's always big for me too. It's actually one of the reasons we went with the group we did, because that was one of the main things we talked about. Although it's funny, one of the first things Angela told us when we were planning this, because Angela and you were 2 of the first people we brought into this project, because you guys get this side of things a lot. You in particular with things like Kickstarters and running projects. Yep, Angela with anthologies, because she runs the Awesome Possum Anthology. One of the first things Angela told us was, you whenever you set deadlines, be prepared for everyone to miss them, because that's going to happen. Yeah. And she was right. Like, our original deadline for the comics in this project was December 1st. And I think 1 team made it, maybe.
Maybe.
But that's fine. Like, Rainer and I were running the project, and we didn't make the deadline. So it's interesting, because a big part of what we wanted to do with it is figure out a system where we could have firm deadlines and get people going on them, because we want to do that for some future projects. But we're still working that out on how that's going to happen.
Yep. And to the surprise of neither of us, Angela's like, "I hit it."
Oh, you hit it. Yes.
Yep. She was the one that hit the deadline, because of course she was.
I was actually also thinking they'll be in a future interview, but Ian and Andrew, it was funny because they got brought into the project very late. I'd said during the video that it was in the summer, but I thought about it. It happened in like end of September, early October, something like that. So wait, not even that. It might have been November. Like, there was only a couple months maybe to the original deadline, and we'd talk to everyone else about it in August. So we'd like had a long window with it. And Ian and Andrew, both of whom I knew and who knew each other, had independently reached out to me saying, "I need to do something. I'm stuck at home. Like, we need to, like, do you have a project you want to work on or anything like that?" And I'm like, "Well, we do have this anthology. Rainer, are you good with this?" Just randomly bringing in people who have not actually done published comics before. And he was like, "Sure, why not? Let's do it." And they got their stuff out so fast. I think they made the deadline and they had less time than everybody else.
Yeah.
Which was amazing.
Yep. Andrew said Ian set us up for success. He had the story and thumbnails up fast. Yeah.
I've worked with Ian a long time, and when you can get him motivated to write, he writes so fast and so well.
Yeah.
He's also the editor for a lot of my stuff. Like, I will send him scripts and he'll tell me what's wrong with them.
Always have an editor. Hot tip for anybody who wants to get into anything creative: have an editor.
Yes. Actually, that's one of the other things that you brought in on this, because when we originally did this project, we were very careful on who we invited. just because Rainer and I only kind of knew what we were doing, and we were like, we need to have a team that we know we can rely on. And so we sent out the invites. We got a very strong group. It was like you mentioned before, you felt like you were one of the only non-CCS people. Yeah. And I thought about it in the beginning, you pretty much were.
Yeah. But then I was at the start.
Yeah. Then you reached out and you were like, hey, my friend JD really wants to do editing work. Would you be interested in bringing him on? And Rainer and I were both kind of scared to bring on anyone we didn't know. But we looked over some of JD's writing and we're like, oh, this guy can really write. He wants to do editing work. We'll figure out a way to pay him. Like, that was the big concern we had more than anything else is how are we paying people? Because that kind of math gets tricky in a Kickstarter.
It does.
But we did, and I'll tell you, it's one of the best decisions we made.
Yes.
Because, like, not having to be the editor for this project saved us such a headache. It's one thing I will definitely continue to hire out for in the future.
Yep. There's actually a side project that I'm helping a friend of mine get his prose to print. And I was like, I do not have the time to edit these short stories. So I'm just going to see about getting an editor. The first one fell through, but the second one, I just went to a friend of mine from college and I was like, hey, I know that you do some freelance editing work. Would you be able to copy edit some of these short stories? And she gave me a quote and I was like, okay, that's doable. And we made it work. And she actually helped make the stories so much better as a result. And Sean, the writer friend who I hired the editor out for, was really satisfied with the results, which is the most important thing.
Right.
So, like, highly recommend getting an editor when and if you can.
Yeah.
As Rainer says, specifically have JD.
Yes. JD made a great editor.
He did. Yes.
And also did the cover art, which was fantastic.
Yes.
It's funny because the like also bringing on JD, I think opened us up to be able to bring on Ian and Andrew because like part of it was there were very few people we were bringing on that we didn't both know. I think we each had one off the top of my head because my one was you and Rainer had one that he knew from a class below him, and unfortunately they didn't end up. One of the other things in anthologies, I'm trying to be a little coy about it, but it's perfectly fine. You always have a few people who just aren't able to complete the project.
Yeah.
It happens. We'll work with them again in the future.
Yeah, and like if they have to bow out, they have to bow out. That's fine. Yeah. Jessica says, if I ever finish any of the stories I'm working on, I know where to go to for an editor. Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mentioned paying creators, by the way. One of the things that has been cool about this Kickstarter.
Yes.
So we are paying on a sliding scale based on how well the Kickstarter is funded. And basically every $1,000 from this point on that we raise in the Kickstarter, every creative team's getting $60. Like that's the basic math because it's a $5 a page increase. Everyone did 12 pages. And no, stop. I almost looked at the Kickstarter. I'm trying not to do that during this interview.
Don't do that while we're on stream. Gosh dang it. Let somebody in the chat do that for us.
I know. But my point is, it's one of the things that we had a lot of anxiety about because we want to be paying people more than we are.
Absolutely.
The tricky thing is we were doing this anthology with no starting funds. We were getting into this and we pretty much knew that if we hit the $1,500 goal, that would be with Rainer and me putting personal money forward to get some of the stuff happening. Like we weren't going to be taking our page rate, and if anything went wrong, we were prepared to put our own money into it because we barely had a buffer. And it was just that important to us that we'd be getting you guys $10 a page, which is about, at the very least, about a tenth of what we should be paying you guys for finished comic work.
Yeah, for folks who are not in the industry, $10 a page is cheap.
Yes.
I do not say that super duper lightly, but Ben, you understand.
I do. And we wanted, when doing this anthology, if we could have paid more off the bat, absolutely we would have. What's really cool is this Kickstarter is going so well that we might actually be able to pay a decent page rate out at the end of this.
Heck yeah, that would be awesome.
The other thing is we're hoping to have enough of a nest egg from whatever funds are left over that Rainer and I, when we do another Kickstarter or another anthology, we might actually be able to pay people up front at least the base amount.
Heck yeah.
Which we'd really like to do, or get a jump start on the print run so we don't have to kickstart a lot of money. That said, it seems like we can actually kickstart a decent amount of money.
Yeah,
this project's been very surprising.
Yeah, Less Than Secret funded. It reached its initial goal in 5 hours, and then it reached the $3,000 stretch goal in like a week, if I remember correctly.
Hold on, I'm getting two different bits of information in the chat. Rainer's saying that we're at $37.93. Angela's saying there's only $7 till the next stretch goal.
We must have like done some super fast fundraising.
Did we just suddenly get $200?
I wouldn't be surprised. We have some like a high level rewards available.
We do, and also just in case anyone's interested, we have some early bird specials that end today. So
yes,
in about 10 hours. It'll be the last chance for you to grab them. That early bird special is any of the physical copies of the book plus a poster of the cover designed by JD, and that's at a slightly discounted rate from what it'll be after today. If you don't make it, that's fine. You can still get both things, but you'll be saving a little money if you get it now.
Oh, Angela did a correction. No, I got excited and can't do math. And yeah, right now we're at 3,793.
You know what? That is incredible. Like, here's the thing: we've been doing this a week.
We've been doing this a week. Yeah.
We thought we were legitimately worried that 1,500 would be tough to do in a week. And that's not like trying to sell ourselves short. That's just so Kickstarter is a little nerve-wracking for the base goal because you really want to. Until you make the base goal, you haven't made any money at all,
right?
Because it's all or nothing. If you don't hit that goal, everyone gets refunded. You don't get a penny, and it's really like that is an incredibly stressful place to be. My last Kickstarter before this was for the Legacy of L, and I was trying to raise $2,000 for it. I got that on day 30 of a 30-day campaign. Like I barely made it, so I had an entire month where I feel like I aged a year.
Yep.
And it's been incredible because we hit goal here. We almost got halfway during the launch party live stream. It was crazy. And then within 5 hours, we'd done it. And it's funny because I was super high adrenaline leading up to it. And as soon as we made it, I felt my entire body relax.
Yep. Hitting goal will do that. I had that same experience when last month I ran a Kickstarter for The Legend of Jamie Roberts Volume 1, and it got funded. I don't remember the exact time that it got funded, but it was within the first 24 hours. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. We at least made the initial goal. So the funding's going to come in no matter what. I had my own goals for that Kickstarter anyway. Like, I know with Less Than Secret, our goal was to get 3,000 to pay everybody and have books available to print. With Jamie Roberts, my goal, I set the goal of I would love to get 50 backers before this campaign runs out. We ended it with 59.
Nice.
Yes. So goal achieved. So like that was the more important metric for me for Legend of Jamie Roberts Volume 1. We can talk about what metrics you want to use to measure success for Kickstarters, and in fact we have done so in a previous live stream, which you can watch on my YouTube channel, link in the doobly-doo. The shameless plug. But as far as like doing the math and everything else out, like you had spreadsheets for figuring out the stuff for Less Than Secret. I remember that.
My math was insane. I was constantly trying to check variables. I've been doing it periodically through the campaign too, just to see where we are with the number of books we're getting. One of the other things that's been great about working with a team also is did this huge thing of math with all these different variables and all these different possibilities. And when I brought it into the meeting, a bunch of people, like Angela and you in particular, were just like, no, change this, 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 and this. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yep.
Like I was charging too little for when we were figuring out shipping, but I also was underpricing the books, which made a huge difference. The math got way better when I was pricing the books correctly.
Yes.
And also, I want to bring up, this is my third Kickstarter, and I was getting this math wrong still. Like, it happened.
Yep. I think this is the thing is that I have at least 11 of my own Kickstarters that I've run under my belt, but there are a number of them that I have been like the co-collaborator on that either I did not make art for or I just played like a backseat role to.
Right.
So like I have experience with this sort of thing. So I'm really glad that Angela and I could like point stuff out and be like, that and that, do those over again.
Yep.
Yep. Rainer says, I'm still amazed that the math said we would need 75 people for 1,500, but 75 people actually brought us to 3,000.
That is true. The reason for that is that we always do worst case scenario math.
Oh, yeah.
Because the most expensive tier for us in production versus cost is the basic tier of $20 for a paperback book, because printing and shipping, that gets to be a decent amount. And yes, it says free shipping in the US. That's because we factored in the shipping amount in that total.
Yep.
We would have needed 75 backers. Like that, honestly, to me, was the worst case scenario part of it, that getting that many people. My last Kickstarter, I think I had 40 backers. So 75 had me scared.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we also have higher tier items that have better, there's a little bit better value to us in some ways. Like it's expensive to print a hardcover book, but we're also getting a lot more money off of it. It's expensive to make the book sleeve, but we're also getting a lot more money out of it. And some of the add-on goals have a lot of value, but not a lot of material cost.
We're also offering commissions.
This is true, actually. I'll have something for that in a second. But so when people buy those higher tier items, it really helps us. That's why, even though we could have theoretically needed 75 people to hit 1,500, actually, if we'd done if people had only bought the digital copy, it would have been closer to 200. I don't have the exact math in front of me, but it would have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
But then there would be no material cost because it's a digital file, which is awesome.
Yep.
But yeah, that makes it's really nice when people buy the high tier items, because it makes our lives a lot easier. If you really want to make our lives easy, there's this Cryptid Curio cabinet for $800.
And it's curated by our very own Angela Boyle.
Yes. One of those will make us very happy. 5 of those will make us happier. Might make Angela sad. It'll be a lot of work.
Jessica says, but this isn't just your Kickstarter, Ben. It's a group Kickstarter, and everyone's bringing their own fans with your powers combined.
This is true. This is a big part of why I say I wish I had more experience with working in a group, because CCS has a couple group projects. There's one where you make an anthology, where you make, it's just a 5-person team. You make a very basic anthology. And the other one is called the Silver Age project, where you kind of have to replicate the assembly line system that Mainstream does, and you have 2 weeks to put out a comic with specific specs.
Oh boy.
Actually, that one turned out awesome for our group, because I got really like, everyone in my class was awesome, but somehow our team got a few people who were powerhouses in very specific things. Like we had Tilly Walden doing a lot of the work on the art. Wait a
second. Tilly Walden.
Yeah, you may know that name. She's one of the people I always name drop because she's successful from our class. Okay. She's had several graphic novels come out. She's won an Eisner. Spinning, I think, is what she won the Eisner for.
Wow.
At the end, she also did The End of Summer. I like this part. You a good chance you came across some of her stuff. On a Sunbeam, that's right.
On a Sunbeam, yeah.
Yeah, she's absolutely fantastic creator. She's the one really famous person for my class. Is basically how we put it.
Yeah.
great to work with, does great work, works very fast. Like by the time she graduated, I think she'd had a couple graphic novels under her belt and published them, and that's
wow.
Yeah,
That's bananas.
But yeah, also Casimir Lee, who has done a lot of work with the Nib. You may know his stuff. We also had Anna Selheim, who I believe has done Nib work and does a lot of other great comics. And the writer was Cooper Whittlesey. Actually, I don't know what Cooper's up to nowadays, but he's a really, really fun, interesting writer with his stuff. And so the project, we kind of had a pretty strong team. I thought I was the weak link. Except it turned out I was the only one who wanted to do the tech stuff. So I had my one niche.
Oh, there you go.
I was like, cool, I'll assemble the file. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And we put out a comic called Little Lost. We had to base our comic on the style of Harvey Comics, which is like Casper the Friendly Ghost, Richie Rich.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we read through it and we had to read a bunch of them. We were like, these are not great comics. And then they told us it also had to be a PSA, but on any subject we wanted. And we're like, okay, what do we do with this? Because we've been assigned specifically modeled after Little Dot, which is a bunch of stories about a little girl who's obsessed with polka dots. Like that's the best we had to work with. What are we going to do about it? And Cooper, insane genius that he is, wrote an entire thing on different theological theories on death. That's what the PSA was.
What?
It's this little girl who finds out her cat is dying and starts exploring the different worlds of what people think happens when you die.
Oh my gosh.
It was completely nuts and it was awesome.
This sounds amazing. Oh my God.
Angela's telling me Cooper has a graphic novel out with Ad House. I did not realize that. That's fantastic. I need to get a copy.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. Cooper's one of those guys, though, I think he wrote the entire script in 36 hours without sleep. Like he's one of those guys who just stayed up and just started handwriting everything.
Yeah. I've heard there was a comic artist that I followed for a while. Oh gosh. N.A. LeGros, I believe is who it is. I've heard rumors that she's one of those creators that like when she's tasked with making a comic, she will sit down and she will draw all of the pages all at once within like a 72-hour period, and then she will just collapse for like 3 days.
Yeah.
Which like for folks who are wanting to like make comics, I'm not sure that I would recommend that method.
We had a classmate named Shashwat who came from an engineering background and would do the same thing.
Oh my gosh.
But
like, why?
He's like, I'm used to these brutal schedules.
I mean, on the one hand, brutal schedules, do what you got to do to adapt to them. But on the other hand, like, that's just not healthy. But I'm definitely one of those people that like, I only ever pulled 2 all-nighters in my life. One was for 24-hour comic day, and that one was a by choice thing. The other all-nighter that I ever pulled, I was like, I did not get any benefit from doing this. So like, man, I'm one of those people that does not do like all-nighters because geez, I like my sleep.
Yeah, I pulled a bunch of all-nighters in college. I used to, because I'm a procrastinator, it happened all the time, and I have terrible sleep habits anyway. People used to be freaked out because I take caffeine pills in college to keep working.
Oh dear. Jeez.
But yeah, when the last all-nighter I think I pulled was for Trinary, so that would have been 2015, and it was the first time I was like, this was worth it. This was awesome. Then we played kickball later. It was great.
I mean, I'm glad that it was at least worth it for you, but like, I'm not the type to ever do that ever again.
That's completely fair. Like, if you don't need to pull an all-nighter, don't.
Yeah.
It's good to know that you can. Like, that's one of the things I like about it. But
yeah.
The one of the things, though, that this brings up, that if you're interested in getting into doing comic work and stuff like that, there's one skill that is really hard to learn later in life that I strongly recommend you learn as soon as possible, and that's how to work your ass off.
Yes.
I am by nature lazy. Like, it is really hard for me not to be lazy and procrastinate and not do anything. Because I never really developed a good work ethic. And the people I see who do really, really, really well at this are able to, like, I mentioned Tilly before. A lot of people treat Tilly like she's a prodigy and things like that. Here's the truth. Here's why Tilly does in comics as well as she does. because she can sit down and work on comics for 8 hours a day like it's a job.
Yeah.
I can't do that. My brain goes everywhere. If on a good day I can get in like 5 hours of good work.
Yeah. It's funny because like comics is one of those things that now I can sit down for hours at a time and just draw them, because like with any other work I have to get up and move. And part of that is because of an injury that I sustained in 8th grade where I broke my tailbone, so sitting for extended periods of time is literally a pain in the ass. But when it comes to like making comics, once I get into a particular groove, I can just keep working for like 2-3 hours, and 2 or 3 hours later, I'll lift my head up and be like, wait a second, how much time has passed?
Right. As someone with a bad back, I get that too. Also, just want to go ahead and throw out there because I see the comments. Hi, Mom. Yes, I can see you watching me on Facebook.
What? You're a procrastinator. Yep. Surprise.
That's merch for me, right? Yes, it is.
Yeah. Rainer says that it's a muscle that you build up, but also an easy one to break down, which is very, very true. Like perseverance and being able to focus is a muscle, and the more that you do it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah, and I don't know. My problem tends to be that my brain tends to go everywhere but what I'm supposed to be focusing on. And that makes it's nice when you actually get into drawing, especially when there are close deadlines. Like I'm probably going to get into that moment pretty soon because I am behind on cost pain because of this Kickstarter.
Surprise!
Actually, I've been pretty good about that, but like I got 4 strips ahead before the Kickstarter started, and I now need to do the next 4 strips if I can. And the problem is, so a lot with cost pain, it's a weekly strip that I'm putting out, but I often try to have a backlog. I figured out that I'm best off with only having a couple strip backlog, because otherwise I fall out of the habit of working on the strip. So doing 4 might have been a mistake.
So like, hold on, let me make sure that I heard and understand you correctly. So like your ideal would be to have like 1 or 2 strips done ahead of time, not necessarily 4.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's so easy to say, oh yeah, I got 4 weeks, I don't need to work on this now. And then the next thing you know, there's only 1 week left. And you're like, I need to do 4 strips now? Wait, what?
Yeah, I've discovered that with The Legend of Jamie Roberts too. Like a 2-week buffer is kind of my sweet spot. Because like, realistically, if an emergency does pop up, the most time that I've ever had an emergency take as far as time is like a week. But that's just enough time to throw off anything. But a 2-week buffer, it's really nice. It's really nice. Because like if you have to miss a week for an emergency of some sort, then you at least have that. But it's also nice that like as you keep going, you're like, okay, well, if I don't meet this deadline, there's at least 2 weeks ahead.
Right. I'm trying to remember the exact situation, but one of the other problems you come into is if you work too far ahead. Like we live in the 24-hour media cycle setup where if you make stuff too far ahead, you don't know what's currently happening in the news and stuff like that when stuff is scheduled for. I remember there's one where I was just like, oh, maybe I should not have done this in the past year. I can't even remember what it was, but it's like something about what had just happened in the news cycle. I was like, oh, hold on. And, you know, you plan this, if you do it too far ahead, you're 4 weeks out. You don't know this is going to happen in 2 weeks. Like,
this is especially true if you're making a story that's a little like yours in that it takes place in the real world and involves some real world things. I don't necessarily have to worry about that because I make a fantasy comic. So if you want a good workaround for that kind of a problem, just make fantasy.
It's true. Like one of the things that's funny about it, cost pain's very different from what I've done in the past. Because I tend to do a lot of dark and mystery and horror, and then I did a comedy strip that's slice of life, which is very much outside of what I normally do. And that's what people seem to respond to. And I'm like, oh, Well, I guess I'm doing more of these. Cool, sure. We've talked before about this, but you brought up how it's better to find your niche and like stuff that you really want to be doing rather than try to cater to what other people want. I'm a little bit in the opposite camp. I find it very gratifying to make stuff that is not necessarily what I'd normally be making, but people like it.
Yeah. And well, what is it about that resonates with you? What is it about that work process?
Honestly, I think it's validation. I think it helps that your work is not only being done for you to some degree. It's kind of humbling to be like, I made something that people enjoy. And there's a positive serotonin feedback with that. I'm still going to make my own projects and stuff that is completely separate. And cosplay, like, I do own, like, that's me too. It's a different side of me, but it's interesting getting that kind of response to it, because I've had people at cons who come up and look at it and point and say, that's me, or that's you. I've had people who identify with it in a way that no one's identified with my work before. So and it's funny because a lot of times the jokes that people like are the ones where it's like, I have a deadline, I'm just going to rattle this out. Yeah. And for some reason that works. Cat tax.
Yes, cat tax. For if anybody was wondering why my arm was like doing weird things, it's because Bree decided now to jump into my lap. She really wanted cuddles.
Yeah, cats will do that.
Yeah. Well, she is my resident cryptid. Like Tuna is Rainer's resident cryptid. Yeah.
I really wish you could rig the door behind me to suddenly open. Like slowly.
No, why would you do that? That would scare her out of my lap.
Oh, I didn't mean like loudly. I just wanted it to be creepy, like the door just suddenly. It's just the horror guy in me.
Yeah. Well, what is it about the horror genre that makes you want to work in it?
It's funny because I didn't grow up into horror. There are things that I got into when I was very young with that. Whenever we went to Blockbuster and video rental stores, one of my favorite things for some reason was to go in and look at all the slasher movie boxes and things like that. I don't know why I really liked that art, even though I didn't watch any of the movies, and I still don't really care for slasher horror movies. But
something about the box art.
The other thing is, like, when I was in probably about third grade, sometime around then, I started getting horror anthology books like Short and Shivery and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Oh, bless you.
And I don't know why, but that stuff had always kind of clicked in my head as being awesome. Like, especially, and we talked about this during the launch party, but the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark original art by Stephen Gamel.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such good horror art.
It's very good horror art.
When I got to college, I got brought into horror comics because one of my friends, Brendan Cox, was really into Junji Ito. Yeah, like, it's funny because I've talked Steve up to death, and he does a lot of horror stuff. I've told him to his face that I think Junji Ito's the best horror cartoonist out there, and he agreed with me.
Oh, wow.
But it's just one of those things where it's like, I say that knowing, like, Steve is right next to me, and he's like, yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah. Well, okay. The thing about Junji Ito, I've only ever read one of his short stories, and it was phenomenally creepy. The thing of it is, it's not just the monster designs, which are definitely unique. It's not just the atmosphere. It's also, especially with horror comics, there's audience participation involved in it. You're the one turning the page. Like, the author cannot compel you to turn the page except by sheer force of storytelling, but it is up to you to actually, like, participate in the medium and flip that page to see what happens next. And that's part of the charm of horror comics, is the audience participation aspect of it.
Fun fact, by the way, I was recently creating a mold for the book sleeve because I'm planning what the design's going to be like.
Yeah.
And because I needed a roughly the same size hardcover book, I used a Junji Ito book.
Nice.
And it's funny because so this book actually got sent to me by Brendan while I was still at CCS.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'd done a lot of horror comic reading. I started making my own horror comics and realized this is a lot of fun to do. But you know, when you work in a genre like that, you get a little bit inured to the tropes and the timing and stuff like that, so it doesn't affect you as much. It's like one of the things that people say about learning to make film is that once you know how the sausage is made, you're probably not going to enjoy film as much, which is kind of true.
Yeah.
But what's funny is he sent me that book in the mail and I read the entire thing that night. That's 8 short horror stories, and there were 6 times that made me go, ugh, which is a really good track record. Like, that is hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, Junji Ito and Steve were probably the 2 big reasons I started doing horror. And what I discovered was you can create the thing that's fun about horror is it's not a thinky genre. Good
Not
horror
really.
you feel more than you think about. In some ways, it's sort of the opposite end of the coin of mystery, which is the other thing I love doing. Because mystery requires a lot of cerebral processing and planning out every little detail, and the reader has to be engaged with their head in order to pick up on anything. And with horror, it is entirely in the gut. You want to have that page turn where someone gets to that image and is horrified.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments with that was at CCS. We were learning how to make e-books, and part of that was you can make animated GIFs as part of ebooks.
You can, yes.
Yeah. And so they encouraged us to do that with one of the pages and this was all using a previous comic we did, and I chose a short horror comic I did called Snakes, which ends with the guy, apologies, this is going to be graphic, just be ready. But it ends with a guy cutting open his stomach and a bunch of snakes come out.
Oh.
And so I changed the thing so you see him cutting, and then it like fades in and the snakes come out. And as soon as the instructor, John Chad, saw that, he was like, give me the file. We're putting it on the big screen. And I got to hear the entire class simultaneously go, ugh! And that moment is exactly what you want in a good horror comic.
Yep.
And getting it, going back to validation, that when you nail the feeling in other people, it's so good.
Yes.
Also, horror you can do surprisingly quickly if you want to. One of my 24-hour comics was a horror story, so that you just can rattle that out if you need to, because sometimes that creates a more visceral reaction.
Yep. For sure.
Just to briefly bring it up, because we mentioned Stephen Gamel.
Yes.
And his artwork from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I've been working on emulating that, and it's one of the commission tiers for this Kickstarter.
Yes, show us an example of one of the commissions you could possibly get when you back Less Than Secret on Kickstarter. Woo, look at that.
I'm the first to admit this one's a little bit rough. I hadn't done it in a while, and I just got new powder, which is working a little differently. This is made with graphite powder in kind of a wash style.
Yeah.
I came across a post on Reddit actually talking about how Stephen Gamel made this really creepy, drippy, grimy looking art, and the main trick is he was using graphite wash. And so I started learning to do it, and I'm like, okay, yes, this is correct. This is how he did it. It is one of my favorite mediums to do illustration work in.
Yeah.
I thought about doing a comic, and I'm like, I don't think I could do it because it's too messy. But
it takes a particular work setup to do any kind of wash-based art in comic form.
Yeah, and it's even more than most washes. This powder gets everywhere. There's no water involved. It's all dry powder that you work into the paper and then spray with a fixative.
Oh, so, okay, that's different.
But as a result, my table is splotchy. My drawing table.
As it do. Yeah. I've definitely had it. I don't usually work with graphite. If I do water-based mediums, it's watercolor or gouache. Gouache. I pronounce it gouache. Yeah. But usually that's my medium of choice with wet stuff. Still, though, it does find a way to get places that you don't expect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm usually pretty good at keeping my watercolors clean because it's like, this is wet. This is, going to behave like water. I know how to keep that away from stuff, how to clean it up. When it's a powder that you're applying, it's definitely different. I think some people do mix it with water to make an actual wash that way, but I mean, the messiness is part of the perk.
It's one of the charms of working with traditional.
It's true. Like, my hands are black by the end of working on it because it's just covered in this powder.
And that's when you know it was a day well spent.
True. Very true.
Yep. Actually, speaking of mediums, you did not do the Chupacabra story for Less Than Secret in graphite wash. You used what to make it?
I was all digital on it.
Okay.
And
what is your program of choice for anybody who might be wondering?
I use Clip Studio Clip Studio Paint EX is the full name of it. Clip Studio Paint EX.
Okay.
It's worth getting the top of the line version for it because it goes on sale for like $75, and that's a one-time payment. I also use the Creative Cloud through Adobe for stuff, and it's $60 a month. So if you can avoid using that, I heartily encourage it. Or if you can work with a school and get their discount where it's like half, more than half off. That's what I did while I was at CCS, and that was very helpful. But yeah, anything to avoid. Like, I end up using a lot of the Creative Cloud suite. That's why I keep it up. Like, I don't just use Photoshop. I use InDesign. I use Premiere. I use Audition. There's various things that use all this stuff. It's how I made the video for the Kickstarter. It's using Audition and Premiere.
Yeah. So, a fun fact for folks watching: Ben edited that video that you see on the Kickstarter page.
Putting film skills to use.
Hey, you got to do it somehow.
It's true.
Yeah. Maybe one day one day I'll put a video in one of my Kickstarters, but so far I have never done that.
Yeah.
But you know what? There are folks who do it so that I don't have to.
It's true. And honestly, one of the things that would make it a little bit easier, like, it was interesting this time because we brought in multiple people to do the voice over for it. So I was editing everybody's thing together. It's a little bit easier when you're just working with yourself. I will admit that. Because you do like 5 takes, you listen to it, you figure out which takes work, and you make one take.
You just edit the audio file as needed to make it work.
Yeah. And then after that, for the video, you just pick some good images and just have them pan across the screen in sync with the audio, and you're done. Like, that's pretty much what you do.
Yep. I've edited for podcasts before because I am of the firm belief that any creative should try anything that they want to just throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks.
Yeah.
And I have done podcasts in the past before. And I will say, having multiple takes of something, or like being able to, like, if you fudge up a line and you just go, boop, boop, take 2. And then start over, like, that is so helpful whenever you get back into the audio file to edit it, because then you can just cut where you need to. It's so nice.
Yeah. One of the funny things with, like, seeing what sticks, I was talking to my dad a while ago, and he was actually encouraging me to try writing a novel, like writing prose.
Give it a try.
Books. Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit of that type of writing, like not a full book or anything like that, but it's never worked for me as well as
comics or even screenwriting.
Like, I get a lot of the stuff out visually better than I do putting it into words. But what's funny is, like, later that day, we were having another conversation. I mentioned wanting to learn traditional painting more. Like, I'd really love to learn how to do oil painting.
Yeah.
You're never going to make an oil painting comic. Why are you going to waste your time? You should specialize. And I'm like, you were telling me to write a book earlier. What's going on?
Yeah, no, just make an oil painting. Try it out. See how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little paranoid about oil painting just because I do a little better when I have, at least the first time, I have someone walking me through the basics. Just because I feel more comfortable, like, not making it up. I've done that with a few. I've done just making it up with a few things, and it's turned out interesting every time. Like,
yeah,
I kind of don't. My friend John was in the chat earlier. The guy who does a lot of music stuff. I thought about sending him the audio files for some touch up on the on Less Than Secret because he's much more of an audiophile. He'd be able to hear where stuff's wrong. He'd be able to correct it. And I was just thinking, I can't show him this file.
Oh.
Like, one of the funny tropes for people who are getting into digital art who really don't know what they're doing, like people who know what they're doing do this to some degree too, but you just have a ton of unorganized layers.
Yeah.
I basically did that in an audio file because I was like, I don't entirely know how the best way to organize it, but this works, so done.
Oh, man.
There's no wrong way to do things, but this was probably the wrong way.
Yeah, just a little. I haven't done very many audio things, but like just hearing multiple layers of audio is just like, oh no.
Not at the same time. I would have them muted when I wasn't using them, but it was more like
good.
I set up a track that was my audio, take 1, take 2, take 3, Rainer, take 1, take 2, take 3, stuff like that.
Okay.
But they'd all be in the same mixing file, just muted. So whenever I was like, whose sentence would work well here, I would try to find that sentence in there and unmute that channel and listen to it. And I'm like, okay, cool. I grab that chunk and move it into the main thing. It was absolutely not the most efficient way to do it, but I mean, it's basically how I used Photoshop when I was starting. So
you have to learn somehow. So there's that, at least.
One of the great things about digital art is, while there is probably a best practices way to do it, there's kind of a lot of ways you can do stuff that works. As long as it works, it's right. Like
pretty much
drawing in Photoshop, there are 100 ways to do the exact same thing. And if that works for you, that works for you. I started off drawing in Photoshop without having a clue what I was doing and just figuring it out.
Yeah. That was me with Photoshop. And then I discovered Clip Studio Paint and I was like, oh man, this program can do what Photoshop does with way less clunk to it.
Well, what's funny is I started back when it was Manga Studio. I got Manga Studio, like the $20 version, the super basic. And I'd been doing Photoshop for a little while. I could not for the life of me figure out Clip Studio. It made no sense. And then I went to CCS and got taught how to use Photoshop correctly. Like they had a lot of practices that turns out I was doing stuff the hard way and I didn't know it, or I was doing stuff that was never going to print well. And I learned a lot of better practices. And then I tried one of the better versions of Clip Studio and I realized, oh, I can figure out everything now because now I understand what it's for.
Yep.
So I would say I find Photoshop a little bit more intuitive in some ways than Clip Studio, but once you know what you're doing, Clip Studio works a lot better for a lot of stuff.
Well, as somebody who actually uses Clip Studio Paint for their workspaces, not just with comic stuff, but also with Neverending, like that's Neverending's program of choice is Clip Studio Paint right now. Right. We can save things in Photoshop file, but Clip Studio can actually open Photoshop files for one thing. But the reason that we went with that one was because for one thing, a lot of the keyboard shortcuts, they're not just customizable, but they're, in my opinion, more intuitive than Photoshop's. Because I had worked with Photoshop before, but there's something about Clip Studios that, like, as somebody who I really like the language of comics, Photoshop is not built with the language of comics in mind.
Right.
Clip Studio is. True. Yeah. A Clip Studio is. And that's why I love it so much.
The way I see it is the best thing about Clip Studio is it combines several Adobe programs and takes the comic elements of each of them.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, honestly, I think the big thing that turned me around on it was getting to understand vectors better. Because I would use the way I thought you made your art look good back when I was first starting out was I'd draw it all in Photoshop and then I transfer it into Illustrator and live trace it so it would become a vector, which would smooth out all the lines. And
I mean, that's a way to do it, but that's really time intensive.
Oh, it took me 7 months to do it. Like an 18-page strip. I mean, an 18-page comic, if I'm remembering correctly. Like, it was messy. Yeah. Also, I was making my files 11 by 17 full color. Like, each file was like a gig. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's enormous.
Yeah, because I was like, oh yeah, comic artists work larger than they're actually going to be printing. But the thing is, they don't do that digitally. They do that traditional.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know, so I did it that way. And there are a lot of cartoonists who actually find out ways that they do stuff that is completely crazy. I know cartoonists who draw in Illustrator, and I'm like, how do you do that? I've tried it, and it's nuts, but it works perfectly for them.
I mean, kudos to them, but that's just bananas. It's bananas to me.
Angela or Rayner might know who I'm talking about with this, but there's also a guy Steve talked about in comics history where he looked over old school comics and saw the pattern printed on it. I'm blanking on the term.
Ben-Day dots.
Yeah, the dots to do color differentials and stuff like that in CMYK. And he was looking at it as a kid, and he didn't understand that was a stock pattern that was being put in place. So he made these really intricately colored comics with those dots that he did by hand.
Oh, man.
Like he would do the patterns himself by hand, and he just learned how to do it. And apparently the pages look incredible, but it wasn't until he was much older that he learned what it actually was. And he was like, oh. Oh, wow, okay.
Yep.
It's like
yeah.
It's like when I learned how to do multiply layers properly for shading. I had been doing it the most complicated way ever. And then they said, yeah, you can just pick one color that's is the complementary color of the light, and then you just draw that way. And I'm like, you just saved me so much time and effort.
I mean, that was how I shaded things. Was I would set a layer to multiply, I would set it to a particular opacity, and then I would pick a color that was the complement of whatever light was in the setting.
Right.
And that's actually one thing that I use to change up pages in The Legend of Jamie Roberts is each location has a particular lighting setup. And it's also a good way to tell when something is taking place in Dreamland and when something's taking place in the real world, is that the lighting setups and their shadows are different colors.
That's what I'm doing now, because that's what I finally learned at CCS. What I did originally was I was using a multiply layer, but I thought you were supposed to use a multiply of whatever color you were drawing on. So every time it was a different color, I was changing the color and drawing more. And like it creates an effect that works as a shadow, but it's so time intensive and it doesn't look quite right.
Yeah, it results in a particular look. One thing I discovered is if you really wanted to do that method, have a multiply layer with different shadows for each different color. Easiest way to do that is to just find the layer where you have all of your colors, duplicate it, set that duplicate layer to multiply, and then just erase.
I was going to say use, I'm blanking on the term, masking. Just mask the whole thing and then clear out little spots for it. But I mean, man, the ways I figured out shading digitally were absolutely nuts. Like it started with some fan art stuff I was doing with a friend. But one of the other tricks I tried to do was have, because I saw, people are turning down the opacity and doing it that way. So I'm just going to have 4 25% opacity layers that I'm going to draw. Yeah. See, that face you're making, that's exactly what it was like. And I only used black because I didn't know better, because the shadows are black, right? And it's the most complicated shading system. And so when I learned multiply, I was like, oh yeah, this is a lot easier. And then I learned to use multiply correctly. I'm like, this is even easier than that. You don't know when you're starting out, like
you really don't. Nope. Oh, it's like it took me the longest time to realize that the color layer, I could set the color layer to multiply and it would not affect my line work. It took me so long to figure that out. Yeah, I'm a little embarrassed by how long that took. I also realized fairly recently, you don't have to set your color layer to multiply. You can just have the ink layer on top of it.
Yeah.
I don't know why that never occurred to me, but it had not occurred to me until I saw somebody else do it. And then I was like,
Yeah. One of the other things I remember was learning about anti-aliasing, which is one of the biggest problems in people who make comics for web, because they don't. The whole concept behind anti-aliasing is you're supposed to be making marks that look better on a screen in theory.
Yeah.
But it's terrible for coloring or printing because, like, I remember this specifically with so Penny Arcade a while back did a series of videos on how their process works and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this was back before I did CCS. It may have been 10 years ago. And you can actually watch Gabe like filling in the colors and then going back over and filling and like drawing an extra line to along the line art, because due to anti-aliasing, there's this fuzzy patch where the color didn't get in.
Oh.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know what it is now. Yeah.
And before I did, I really knew what I was doing. What I do is I just click fill a couple times every time, because that would actually force it farther in a bit. And then I learned if you just turn that off, you get perfectly crisp lines, and it doesn't do the fuzzy.
Yep. But you can also change up the quality of your line in at least Clip Studio Paint. I learned this from one of my fellow artists at Neverending. You can change the quality of the line so that it's either more soft or more jagged, and that can affect anti-aliasing as well.
Yeah. I go 100% jagged. I go all the way over because it's high enough resolution that it's not going to matter.
Yeah. I mean, why not?
And it's going to make my entire life easier.
Yeah, if you can get away with it. It is now 2:36. We've definitely gone over the hour and a half mark now.
This is true. Yeah. I'm good for whatever you want to do. I've got cost paint to do later today, and that's about it.
Yeah. Well, I actually have a couple other things that I need to take care of this afternoon. Okay. So we'll just go ahead and wrap this up here.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So final shout out. This is all for Less Than Secret, a cryptid anthology, which is on Kickstarter now. You can find it at tinyurl.com/lessthansecret. There's also a QR code on the upper part of the screen. Yeah, there you go.
Here we go.
There you go. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that.
She was a market researcher.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's delightful. So anyway, that's the Kickstarter. We are still going. The campaign ends later this month, but we are reaching for stretch goals. We do have commissions available. We got paperbacks, hardcover books, posters. Today is the last day to get your early bird specials. So throwing that out there. If you want to get an early bird special, today's the last day to do it. tinyurl.com/lessthansecret.
And they have been pretty popular. So
they have been popular. So grab them while you can. There are lots of other rewards available, including commissions. Ben, would you like to showcase your commission again? This is an example of a commission you could possibly get if you back at the right level on Kickstarter. I also have commissions available. If you would like to get a commission from me, I will show a sample of that right here. Stuff like this. Make a request for your own cryptid if you so like. So those are two examples of two different commissions that you could get if you back this campaign.
One thing you might also want to look at, we have two types of commissions, two basic categories. Physical commissions, where we actually will send you an original. Kelsey's and mine are both like that. We also have digital commissions, and because it's a little easier to distribute digital things as add-ons, that's how those are included. So when you're when you actually back one of these tiers, you can find the commissions after that point. Like when you're checking out, it'll give you the option to back them. That's the work by Rainer, who you may have seen on Kelsey's interview from a couple days ago. Also, Ariane McCrae and Andrew Small are doing digital commissions. So keep an eye out for those in addition to the physical commissions that we're offering as actual reward tiers.
Yes. Also, for folks who do not know, there will be more creator interviews throughout the month of April. I am doing an interview every Thursday and Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Dated Time. The full schedule I had posted on my email newsletter. You can find out more about that and link in the doobly-doo. It's the Linktree link. But I will also make a more formal post on my blog that has the full roster and who is being interviewed on what days. But just know, interviews every Thursday and Saturday, 1 p.m. on this channel. So if you would like to tune in for the next one is going to be Thursday, April 15th. I had the calendar right next to me.
In addition, I also have a couple channels that I'm going to be streaming on.
Yes.
Every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're just going to be doing an art live stream for the next month. And actually, what I'd kind of like to do is I'm trying to figure out a good setup for doing physical stuff, because I'd like to be able to do maybe end up making a trial for the book sleeve, or make more of these graphite wash illustrations so people can see what that's like. Maybe if we're planning on doing a draw this in your style challenge soon, and once that comes out, I'm thinking of doing that in graphite wash to show people what that's like.
Yep.
I'm also doing game streams to promote it every Tuesday and Friday at 7 p.m. over on my Twitch channel.
You can find out more about that by going to bwhcomics.com.
That's right.
Yes.
But yeah, on the Twitch channel, like I said earlier, we've been playing Until Dawn, which is sort of peripherally cryptid related. I don't want to get into it too much, because spoilers, and because the monster in it is sort of not considered a cryptid anymore for complicated reasons. But if you watch my stream on Tuesday, we'll probably get into that, because I think we're going to finally be seeing the creature. But yeah, we've been doing that. It's been an awesome time. And yeah, keeping busy. Also, cosplaycomic.com, new comics every Tuesday. Yes,
because that is the project that you do whenever you're not working on Less Than Secret.
Whenever I am needing to sleep, yes.
Yeah. Yep. So for folks who are unable to financially back the campaign, there's other ways that you can participate, like not just sharing the link. You can also participate in our coloring page challenges. We post those in the updates section on Kickstarter. We have a coloring page available for you to color. It is this beauty. Now, okay, we will have more coloring book pages available in the coming days, so keep an eye out on our updates page for that.
Yep, this art, by the way, is by Angela Boyle, Angela B Comics on everything. And yes, I did mine in watercolor, because why not? If we can get 20 people coloring that and posting it to social media with the hashtag Less Than Secret, we're going to unlock a desktop background for everybody. So even if you can't participate by actually backing, that can help us out, because it helps spread the word.
Yes. For folks whose computers may have glitched, I know mine just did. If you missed it, the page was drawn by Angela Boyle, one of the contributors to the anthology. So just throwing that out there in case somebody's computer glitched, because I know mine did.
Yeah, you froze for me for a second. I don't know what happened on the actual stream.
I don't know what happened. I know, how dare. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But I think that's as good a time as any to say that we should wrap this up now.
Fair enough.
Yeah. All right. So if you would like to find out more about Less Than Secret, a cryptid anthology, the link is on the screen. It's also in the doobly-doo. You can find out more about either of us via the links in the doobly-doo as well. Find out more about Ben and me through the links there. The campaign is still going, but the early bird rewards expire today. So if you have the means, back it while you can. Next interview will be Thursday on this channel, 1 p.m. Eastern dated time. If you liked this episode, give it a like. The best thing that you can do to help support indie creators like me is to back the Kickstarter. The next best thing that you can do is to subscribe to the channel. So, and everybody is saying great job. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yes, hearts all around. Hearts all around. Yeah. And that'll be it for me. I know you have a sign off. Go ahead and say your sign off.
Rock on, guys, and never stop drawing.
Thank you so much for watching. You are awesome.